Welcome to Slumber Stories, a quiet place where the busyness of the day slowly fades away, where the sounds of the outside world become softer, and where you can simply close your eyes, relax your body, and let your thoughts gently drift away. Tonight, we invite you to travel somewhere far from the busy streets and crowded cities, somewhere peaceful, somewhere quiet, somewhere deep within an ancient forest. Imagine a vast forest stretching for miles beneath a wide and peaceful sky. A forest so deep that sunlight can sometimes barely reach the ground. A narrow river flowing slowly between smooth stones. Tall pine trees moving gently in the evening breeze. And somewhere, far beyond the roads and towns, hidden among the trees, there stands a small wooden cabin. Inside that cabin lived a woodcutter named Elias. For many, many years, Elias had called the forest his home. When he first arrived there, he was a young man. Now, he was an old man. His hair had become silver. Deep lines had appeared on his face, but there was still a quiet peacefulness in his eyes. Because the forest had been his life, he had fallen in love. There, he had built his home. There, he had raised his family there. And over the many years he had spent beneath those ancient trees, the forest had shown him things he could never fully explain. Tonight, we will listen to the story of that long life. The story of a woodcutter, a small family, a little wooden cabin, and a deep, mysterious forest. So, wherever you are right now, make yourself comfortable. Let your body become still. Take a slow, gentle breath in and slowly breathe out. There is nowhere you need to go tonight. Nothing you need to finish. Nothing you need to worry about. Just listen and allow yourself to slowly enter the peaceful world of the deep forest. Many years ago, when Elias first discovered the forest, there was nothing around him but trees, tall pine trees, old oaks, moss-covered stones, and a narrow river that flowed quietly down from the mountains. Near the river, Elias discovered a small clearing. He stood there for a long time. The place felt peaceful. There was fresh water nearby. There were plenty of fallen branches for firewood, and the tall trees offered shelter from the wind. Elias decided to stay. With his own hands, he built a small wooden cabin. At first, the cabin was very simple. It had wooden walls, a small door, 2 little windows, and a fireplace in the center. But as the years passed, the cabin slowly became more than just a shelter. It became Elias's home. A few years later, a young woman named Anna came to live with him. She became his wife. Together, they made the little cabin warmer and more beautiful. Then, one spring morning, their daughter Lily was born. From that day forward, the cabin felt completely different. There was laughter inside. There were small footsteps across the wooden floor. There were warm meals beside the fireplace. And every evening, when Elias returned from the forest, Lily would run toward the door to greet him. Outside, the forest became dark. The moon rose above the trees. The river continued flowing quietly, and the little cabin became a warm island of golden light in the middle of the enormous forest. Years passed. Spring came. Summer followed. Then, autumn arrived with golden leaves, and finally, winter covered the forest in snow. Then, the seasons began again. Year after year, decade after decade, this became Elias's life. Every morning, he went into the forest. He collected fallen branches. He gathered dry wood. He carefully cut only what was necessary. Then, he carried the wood to a small town beyond the forest and sold it. The money he earned bought food for his family. But Elias never cut living trees without a good reason. He believed the forest had given him everything he needed, so he always tried to give something back. Every year, he planted young trees, and as the decades passed, those little trees grew taller. The forest around his cabin slowly changed. One day, Elias realized something. The forest he had once entered as a stranger had slowly become part of his family, and perhaps he had become part of the forest too. Elias had lived in the forest for so many years that he began to understand its quiet language. He knew when rain was coming. He could feel a storm approaching by the way the wind moved through the trees. He could tell when morning was nearby, listening to the birds. Even the river seemed to speak to him. When the water became louder, Elias knew there had been rain somewhere in the mountains. The animals of the forest seemed to recognize him as well. Every morning, a little squirrel often appeared near the cabin window. A deer sometimes stood quietly beside the river during winter. Small rabbits came close to the cabin, searching for food beneath the snow. Elias never disturbed them. During the coldest months, he sometimes placed a little grain outside for the smaller animals. Lily learned from her father that the forest was not simply a collection of trees. It was a living world, a world that breathed, a world that changed, a world that remembered. One autumn afternoon, Elias went deep into the forest to collect firewood. Near an old fallen tree, he noticed something moving. It was a tiny squirrel. One of its legs was hurt. Elias carefully picked it up and brought it home. Lily was delighted. She made a small bed for the little animal. For several weeks, the family cared for it. Slowly, the squirrel became stronger. Then, one morning, it disappeared into the forest. Lily was sad to see her little friend go. But the next morning, the squirrel returned. It sat beside the cabin window. Lily smiled. She named it Little Pine. From that day forward, Little Pine visited them often. Years passed. Many animals became familiar visitors. But the forest gave Elias more than friendship. It also gave him experiences he could never completely explain. And some of those strange experiences stayed in his memory for the rest of his life. The first unusual experience happened during Elias's third year in the forest. It was a cool autumn evening. Elias had traveled farther than usual while collecting wood. By the time he started walking home, the sun was already disappearing behind the trees. The forest was becoming darker. Elias knew the way home well. He had walked that path many times. But suddenly, between the trees, he noticed a small light. It was warm and golden. At first, Elias thought perhaps another traveler had built a small fire. He walked toward it, but as he moved closer, the light seemed to move farther away. Elias continued walking. The light moved again, farther and farther. Finally, Elias reached an enormous old tree, but there was no fire, no traveler, no lantern, nothing. Only a single firefly, floating quietly beneath the branches. Elias stood there for a moment. Then he smiled. Perhaps the forest had simply been playing a little trick on him. He returned home and told Anna what had happened. Anna listened quietly. Then she smiled. Perhaps the forest was showing you the way home, she said. Elias laughed, but he never forgot that evening. Over the years, there were other strange moments. Sometimes, late at night, Elias heard footsteps outside the cabin. Slow footsteps, soft footsteps. He would open the door, but there would be no one there. Sometimes, after a snowfall, he discovered strange footprints leading toward the cabin. The prints would reach the front door and then suddenly disappear. On other nights, Elias heard a soft bell somewhere deep within the forest. One quiet sound, then another, but he could never find where it came from. Still, these things never frightened him. Instead, Elias believed that perhaps the deep forest had its own mysteries, and perhaps some mysteries were never meant to be solved. One summer evening, after many years had passed, Elias experienced a night he would remember for the rest of his life. Dark clouds had gathered above the forest throughout the afternoon. Elias returned home early. He carried a large bundle of dry wood into the cabin. Before sunset, the rain began. At first, it was gentle. Soft drops fell against the wooden roof. Tap, tap, tap. But slowly, the rain became heavier. Soon, the entire forest was filled with the sound of water. Rain fell across the trees. Rain filled the river. Rain covered the roof of the little cabin. Inside, Elias placed another log onto the fireplace. Anna prepared a warm pot of soup. Lily sat beside the window and watched the rain. Outside was dark. Inside was warm. The fire danced softly across the wooden walls. The smell of soup filled the room, and the sound of rain continued through the night. That evening, Elias told his family about the first time he had entered the forest. He told Lily how young he had been, how frightened he had felt during his first winter, and how he had slowly learned to love the quiet life of the forest. Lily eventually fell asleep beside her father. Anna sat quietly near the fire. Elias listened to the rain. At that moment, he felt something he had rarely felt before: complete peace. He looked around the small cabin. His wife was beside him. His daughter was sleeping nearby. The fire was warm. The rain was falling, and the forest surrounded them. Elias thought, there could not possibly be a safer place in the world. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, his family slept peacefully, and the little cabin remained warm throughout the long night. A few years later, one winter arrived that seemed to last forever. Snow fell for days, then weeks. The forest became completely white. The river slowly froze. Heavy snow covered the branches of the trees. Fortunately, Elias had prepared well. His woodshed was full. The family had enough food, and the fireplace remained warm. Then one night, a powerful snowstorm arrived. The wind moved around the cabin. Snow struck the windows. The trees groaned softly in the darkness. Elias closed the wooden shutters. The family gathered near the fireplace. Outside, there was almost nothing to see, only darkness and snow. The hours passed. Then, sometime after midnight, Elias heard something, a soft sound, outside the front door. He listened. The sound came again, slowly, carefully. Something was walking through the snow. Elias stood up. He walked toward the door. Anna looked at him. "Stay inside," she whispered. But Elias wanted to know what was outside. He opened the door. Cold air rushed into the cabin. Snow covered the ground. There was no person, no traveler, nothing. But there were small footprints in the snow. They began near the door, then continued toward the forest. Elias stood there for a long moment. He could have followed them, but instead, he gently closed the door. The next morning, when the storm had passed, Elias stepped outside, and there, beside the cabin, stood a young deer. Snow covered its back. It looked quietly at Elias. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the deer slowly turned and disappeared between the trees. Elias never knew for certain whether the deer had been the visitor from the previous night, but somewhere in his heart, he believed it had been. Time never stops. Lily grew older. The little girl who had once run across the wooden floor became a young woman. Eventually, she left the forest to study in a distant city. The cabin suddenly became much quieter. Elias and Anna remained, but Lily's laughter was no longer heard every morning. Still, every year, Lily returned. She brought small gifts from the city. Sometimes she brought warm clothes. Sometimes she brought books. Sometimes she brought little toys for the animals she remembered from her childhood. And every time she returned, she was surprised by how little the forest seemed to change. The trees were taller. The cabin was older. Elias's hair was whiter. The wooden walls had become darker with age, but the fireplace still burned. The river still flowed, and the birds still sang in the morning. One summer evening, Lily sat beside her father near the cabin window. She looked outside at the forest. Then she asked him a question. "Father, did you ever want to leave this forest?" Elias remained quiet for a moment. He looked toward the trees. Then he smiled. "Sometimes," he said, "but after living somewhere for many years, you begin to understand something." Lily waited. "What do you understand?" Elias looked at the forest again. "You think you are living in a place," he said, "but after enough years pass, you realize that the place has been living inside you all along." Lily understood. The forest was not simply her father's home. It was his entire life. Every tree carried a memory. Every path held a story. Every season reminded him of someone he loved. Even in his old age, Elias sometimes walked deep into the forest. One afternoon, he traveled farther than he had ever gone before. Eventually, he reached a place he had never seen. There stood an enormous ancient tree. Its trunk was so wide that several people holding hands could barely have reached around it. Beneath the tree was a flat stone. There were strange markings carved into its surface. Elias could not understand them. He stood quietly beside the stone for some reason. The place felt familiar, as though he had been there before, as though the forest had been waiting for him. Elias sat beneath the ancient tree. He rested his back against the trunk. For a long time, he listened. There were no birds, no wind, no movement. The forest seemed completely still. Then, something unusual happened. The wind suddenly stopped. The leaves became silent. Even the distant river seemed quieter. For a few moments, the entire forest was completely still. Then, Elias heard something. A soft bell, far away. One gentle sound. Then, another. Elias slowly stood. He looked through the trees, but there was nothing. No bell. No person, no house, nothing. Only the ancient forest. Elias eventually returned home. That evening, he told Anna about the strange place. "I found an ancient tree today," he said, "and beneath it was a stone with markings I couldn't understand." Anna smiled. "Perhaps the forest showed you one of its oldest secrets." Elias smiled too. He never found that place again, but for the rest of his life, he remembered the ancient tree, and sometimes, when the nights were very quiet, he wondered whether the forest had truly wanted him to find it. Many more years passed. Elias grew older. His hands were no longer as strong as they once had been. He stopped cutting large trees. Now, he simply collected fallen branches near the cabin. His life had become slower, quieter, but he was content. Then came one final winter. One peaceful morning, Elias sat beside the cabin window. Snow was falling outside. The forest looked exactly as it had when he first arrived many decades earlier. Anna sat beside him. Together, they watched the snow. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Elias smiled. "When I first came here," he said softly, "this cabin did not exist." Anna looked at him. "And now?" Elias looked outside. "Now," he said, "I feel as though it has always been here." That evening, Lily returned to the cabin, but this time she brought her own children. The little cabin filled with laughter once again. The fireplace burned brightly. Warm soup filled the kitchen with its comforting smell. Outside, snow continued to fall. That night, the entire family gathered together. Stories were told, memories were shared, and eventually, everyone fell asleep. But Elias remained awake for a little while longer. He sat quietly beside the dying fire. Then he looked through the window. Moonlight covered the forest. The river was quiet. The trees stood peacefully beneath the snow. Everything seemed to be resting. Elias closed his eyes. He thought about his life. The forest had given him everything: a home, a family, friendship, love, and countless stories. He realized that he had arrived in the forest as a young man, and somehow the forest had quietly carried him through his entire life. The night grew deeper. Inside the cabin, everyone was asleep. The fire slowly faded. Outside, moonlight rested gently upon the wooden roof. The trees moved softly in the night breeze. Far away, the river continued its quiet journey. An owl called once. Then, silence. Returned, the little cabin had stood there for many years. It had seen the first flowers of spring, the long golden days of summer, the falling leaves of autumn, and countless winters covered in snow. It had heard children's laughter. It had heard the sound of rain. It had heard the wind, and it had witnessed an entire family grow together. Inside the cabin, Elias was sleeping. Anna was sleeping. And in another room, Lily and her children were sleeping too. Everyone was warm. Everyone was safe. And outside, the ancient forest slowly disappeared into the peaceful darkness of night. Perhaps somewhere beneath an old tree, a deer was standing quietly. Perhaps a small squirrel was sleeping inside its warm little nest. Perhaps the ancient stone beneath the enormous tree was still shining beneath the moonlight. And perhaps, somewhere deep within the forest, that mysterious bell was ringing again. Once, very softly, very far away. Then everything became quiet again. Perhaps the strange events of Elias's life would never have answers, but perhaps every mystery does not need an answer. Some stories are beautiful because they remain unexplained, and some places become so deeply connected to a person's life that even when the person is gone, the place continues to remember. Perhaps the little cabin would remain for many years. T.S. wooden walls would grow older. Moss would slowly cover its roof. But every spring, birds would return. The river would continue flowing. Winter would bring snow. And on some quiet night, someone might look toward the forest and see a warm light glowing from the cabin window. just as it had many years ago. Because some homes are not built only from wood. Some homes are built from memories, from love, from family. and from a lifetime of stories. That is why the little cabin deep in the forest was never truly alone. The entire forest surrounded it. The river flowed beside it. The sky watched over it. And inside its wooden walls lived the memories of a family. Now the night has grown very quiet. Snow is falling softly. The wind is moving gently through the trees. The river is flowing slowly. And inside the little cabin, everyone is sleeping peacefully. So, perhaps you can close your eyes now, too. Let your body rest. Let your mind become quiet. Allow all the thoughts of today to slowly drift away. There is no hurry. There is nothing you need to do. Only a peaceful night, a deep forest, a little wooden cabin, and the soft, silver light of the moon. Take a slow breath in and gently breathe out. Everything is all right. You are safe. You are peaceful. You can rest now. And if you ever find yourself imagining a little wooden cabin deep within a quiet forest, perhaps you will remember Elias, the old woodcutter who spent his life beneath the trees. The man who came to the forest looking for a place to live and found something much greater. He found a home. He found a family. He found countless memories. And he found a life whose story may have ended, but whose quiet presence perhaps still remains, hidden somewhere among the trees. The night is peaceful now. The moon is shining. The forest is sleeping, the river is flowing, and the little wooden cabin, filled with years of memories, rests quietly beneath the silver sky. Good night. Sleep peacefully. And may your dreams carry you somewhere quiet, somewhere warm, somewhere deep within the peaceful forest. This is Slumber Stories. Good night and sweet dreams.